Okay, so we just got done watching Zajef's top 10 support characters of all time list. The first thing is the time frame, because I don't think Zajef was factoring in maybe halfway through Natlin, so half of Natlin and all of Nordcry, just because they're new, which I think was fine. Okay, so how would I change this? I think the first thing for me is not about the order, it's just about, would there be any characters who I wouldn't put here at all? And is there any characters that I would bring in? I think the most controversial thing at the start was Zajef not putting in Nahida. Yeah, and instead he was talking about using Shinobu, even Raiden. And I think what I would do is I would just remove Shinobu and put Nahida in instead. Maybe you guys agree with Zajef, but for me personally, his reasoning where he put Shinobu actually ranked 7th, but he put Shinobu 7th because she was Hyper Bloom, and he didn't put Nahida in at all because in his opinion Nahida was carried by Dendro and she wasn't what made Hyper Bloom good. Even the first argument I would make is Shinobu or Raiden, whoever you were playing, those are like the DPSs. If anything, Nahida was the support of Hyper Bloom. And I think if you're talking about like the most popular teams that people were playing around that time, or even just in general, I think even the teams where you would play Shinobu, almost always you were playing her with Nahida anyway. And then on top of that, Nahida, you could play her in other teams. Like you could play her in Nilou teams. And even nowadays, even though the cutoff for this list is before Nordcry, she's getting used in Never teams. Honestly, I kind of even joked about this before, but even just for the 3.7 Abyss alone, I feel like Nahida should be in their Hall of Fame. Because this was the Abyss where up until like Stygian came out, people thought this was the hardest content in the game. But to be honest, I've been looking at the supports and you really do, it is hard to come up with 10 supports, to be completely honest. So like not having Nahida in, I don't think I would do that. In fact, I'm actually at 11 characters here, and it's gonna sound harsh, but honestly I agree with Zajef that I shouldn't put Sucrose here either, but I think I've got a different reasoning. I honestly disagree. I don't think Sucrose was in that many teams and was really that good from like Inazuma, Sumeru, and Fontaine, and even a lot of Natlin as well. I think in Natlin people were playing her with Milani and some Arlecchino teams, some other teams here and there, but she definitely got a lot of value recently in Nordcry, a lot of use in Nordcry. But I think for the if you're looking at the first 4 or 5 years of the game, I think our main popularity was honestly like the first year of the game with the original national team and the original Taser teams. And I don't think it was a skill issue that she was forgotten for 2-3 years after that. I just think there wasn't really that much strong uses for Sucrose. I think characters like Kazuha and Zhongli had a lot more of a use for a reason. The question is though, yeah, Sucrose did have some good teams in the beginning of the game and some hits sprinkled in. The question is, did Fischl have that many relevant teams for the first 4 years of the game? Zajef also put Fischl 8th. His reading was Fischl was always good and a good option, but never at the forefront. She was always unpopular. But to be completely harsh, how much common uses did Fischl really have? Like she was also used with Sucrose in Taser teams at the start, and then people were playing her in Sumeru with aggravate teams. But even in aggravate teams, I would argue, similarly to Shinobu, that Fischl was a DPS or a sub DPS. We'll get into that later, the discussion of who is a support and who's a DPS, but I feel like there are going to be some contradictions here. I feel like she has a decent amount of uses now with the Hexarai teams, but before the Hexarai teams, if you're looking at Chevreuse teams, a lot of people weren't even like really playing Fischl with Chevreuse teams. She did receive a lot of buffs, that's true. She had like the golden troop buffs and aggravate buffs here and there, but did she really have that significant amount of teams over the first 4 years of the game? Like, is it harsh to remove Fischl and keep Sucrose? I feel like I'd rather remove Fischl, to be honest. Sucrose was also used a lot in Taser, so you can't really say that. And then aggravate teams, I don't think being used in a few aggravate teams in Sumo is enough to place her alongside some of these guys. Bear in mind, I don't even think Sucrose is that significant, but I'd rather put Sucrose in. Like, honestly, if you were being super harsh, you remove both Sucrose and Fischl and put the Noblesse set or the TTDS set. But if I was putting Noblesse or TTDS, those would probably be in the top 5. So with that being said, I probably would put Sucrose as my 10th character. Again, all-time relevancy before Not Cry and a lot of Natlan. I don't think she really did that much, but I think if you look at the national teams, if you look at the Taser teams, there are the occasional vape teams that some people are playing. And honestly, if the cutoff includes Molani as well, which I think it would include Molani, then you have to also consider Molani. And honestly, like, it was never that good, but you'd also play Sucrose with Shao, which doesn't mean that much. But the point is, I think Sucrose does enough to be here over some other characters. But I do agree with Zajef that she was not popular overall, and there was a bit of skill with her, but I think she does enough. Yeah, this is why I don't do tier lists ever, man. But I think with that being said, I'm putting Nahida at number 9, which it sounds harsh, but of all time, she only came in 3.0, and then she was very good in 3.0, of course, as I talked about. If we're looking at Fontaine and the start of Natlan, you were already seeing that Nahida wasn't really getting that much more teams, and we were starting to see the cracks, see the obvious issue that she had with reapplying her skill, and how that would be an issue in the future. And then we also just started to see post-Sumeru characters just not really be interested in Dendro that much. Even when Chlorant came out, she came out towards the end of Fontaine. We initially did see people debate, oh, do you play Chlorant with Nahida and Dendro teams, or do you play Chlorant in Overload? And then very quickly, people just saw that Overload and a lot of these new teams were just more flexible, the buffs didn't expire, and even the damage was just more higher. So we were seeing the cracks with Nahida, I think. Again, there's a lot of good characters here, so there's no point crying too much about the exact orders, so because I still consider Nahida very good. I just think longevity wise, there are other characters here who had more teams. Luckily, Nahida and even Sucrose, like these two characters, luckily do have a lot of use in Not Cry, but this is not including Not Cry. So what do you want me to do? Zajef had Zhongli at number 9. I think he has been promoted to number 8, which I feel like Zhongli has always been a debatable character. Some people, if you focus on damage, you really don't like rating him as that strong. But I do have to say, damage wise, you know, people were playing him with the Geo characters, people were playing him with Neuvillette. There might have even been some earlier options. I don't think the Huda teams were ever optimal for her, but at least popularity wise, that was a popular use for him. He has a lot of use if you're looking at all time. And he only really, I guess, became completely irrelevant in Natlan, which is about where this list ends. If you're looking at the game of all time, it's just his shielding was just so valuable for people, and this is not just about DPS. Yeah, and he might even get some more use again now as like a comfortable option for Zibai, but that's not included. Honestly, you could even argue putting Zhongli higher just because of how relevant he has been for the overall player base. I mean, he came out in 1.1, so 1.1 all the way until 5.0, he was always one of the most popular players, and even occasionally he probably had just as much teams where he was a strong option for DPS as these two, to be completely honest. And even nowadays, Bo is used in the Stygian cheese. Number 7, I think I'm putting Chevreuse, and that's because it's just difficult to not consider how strong she is nowadays. And so if you're being harsh, you'd mostly have to look at her older Overlord teams, and you have to consider that until maybe the past year, I think a lot of people just didn't have her at C6 as well. You're mainly looking at Raiden, Chlorand overload teams, maybe Arlecchino as well. But like Arlecchino teams, it could be debatable whether people were even really playing it that much. But I feel like using a bit of future sight here, it feels weird putting Chevreuse that low, because we know if there was just a small change, if this was including Moika and Varesa, then Chevreuse is insane with them as well. So I don't know, maybe this is a bit cheating in the rules of the list, but I feel it's very natural to put her here. It's not like Sucrose or Nahida where we're looking at Nordcry. We're just looking at Natlin. And then you can look at Nordcry as well, where she's still very good. Chevreuse was ahead of her time. Yeah, Chevreuse and Farazan. They're probably like modern supports, like how they design like Inefa, Lauma, those characters nowadays. Chevreuse, Farazan were probably the prototype for that. But Zajef had a number 5. I think for all time, that is a bit high. Now, if we were looking at Nordcry as well, she probably would be higher, but... Okay, so number 6. Now, Zajef put Xiangling at number 6. And his reasoning was, it's hard to call Xiangling a support. But honestly, we're going to come to Xiangling later, because I understand that Zajef freestyled this list. I understand there's going to be holes in it. It's not that serious. But if you're looking at Xiangling's damage and saying she's not a support, then you could say the same thing for Shinobu doing damage in Hyper Bloom, Fischl doing damage in all her teams, even kind of Yelan and Xingqiu to a degree. Like a lot of these characters, if you're only looking at buffs, then you'd probably struggle to even make a top 10. So it does depend on your definition of a support. I would consider Xiangling a support, so I'll come to her later. I consider like applying Pyro and like fitting in a team as support in Genshin. What are the characters that you're building around your DPS? But we'll get to that. Instead, for my 6th character, I'm probably going to put Yelan instead. Now, Zajef had a number 10, but for me, I don't think there's that much of a difference between Yelan and Xingqiu. The main difference in terms of an all-time list, honestly, would be Xingqiu releasing in 1.0 and Yelan releasing at the end of Inazuma. I think after that, after Yelan came out, there were like niche techs where sometimes you'd rather play Yelan, sometimes you'd rather play Xingqiu, but I don't think there's that much differentiating them. I don't know if you guys will think this is too low for both of them or too high, but the way I'm looking at it is there are other characters that were more impactful. I think that is how I'm justifying it. It's not because they're really strong or really weak. It's just, would I have 4 more characters ahead of them? I probably would. I would just say, in terms of like this ranking, I wouldn't... Zajef put Yelan number 10 and Xingqiu number 3. I don't think there's that big of a difference. Okay, so in 4th place, Zajef put Kazuha, with one of the reasonings being he was never as strong as he was popular. And honestly, I would have to disagree. I mean, let's pull up Genshin. I honestly feel like we're biased by modern characters, because you can never get the effect that Kazuha had in terms of use, because characters these days, they can be very strong. Escoffier, Lauma, who else? Inefa. But these characters, you're lucky if you're finding 2 or 3 teams for them, to be completely honest. Whereas someone like Kazuha, when he came out, to put it in perspective, you were playing him in your coaching team, you were playing him with Klee, obviously Child International. Not everyone was playing him with Garnu, but maybe half the people were. He was kind of niche with Hu Tao, but he was her super strong option. It just wasn't that popular. Obviously, Eula's physical and Animo teams where you weren't playing Kazuha. So that was immediately a ton of use. But even after he came out, Ayaka, a lot of use. Raiden's main hypercarry team initially was with Kazuha, although National was still played a lot. He played Kokomi DPS. People were playing Yaimiko, Ayato, Yelan DPS with Kazuha. Almost all the characters that came after him, you were all playing with him. And not only that, but once you get past Sumeru, where Sumeru was its own thing, it was intentionally designed to be anti-Kazuha, anti-Bennett. But then you got into Fontaine, Linny, Neuvillette, Risley, Furina, Arlecchino, Chlorand. People were, for what is that, the first 4 years of the game, Kazuha, even just strictly damage wise, was the main option. And then you look at comfy AoE is grouping, even the overworld, although I don't think we're counting the overworld. And the thing is, a lot of those characters, Sucrose wasn't really in contention for them. I know nowadays Sucrose's EM buff is very powerful. For a good chunk of all this, was Sucrose really in contention for many of them? Maybe a couple. I feel like the community forgets just how different the game was before, and therefore just how dominant characters like Kazuha was. So with that being said, kind of talked about him a lot, but I'm not putting him at 4. Instead, okay, honestly, this might be debatable. I feel like do we lose subscribers over this? Maybe. I feel like in an all-time list, I would have to put Furina here. Now, it's not because I think Furina is bad. In fact, if you hear Zajef's reasoning on Furina, Zajef put Furina as number 2. To be harsh, he kind of talked about Furina a bit negatively, to be honest. He thought Furina isn't as great as people say, but she was designed to work well with future characters, which is pretty true. And also he would say that a lot of the time Furina was popular because people pulled constellations, which is also pretty true. I'm putting her here not because I think she isn't that good, but just because I think the other characters did more. Maybe you could say I would rate Furina higher than Jeff, even though ironically I'm putting her lower. Again, this is another thing. I know this was just a video, or this was just a topic that's a Jeff freestyled, I know, but it does show a few holes because he's marking down Furina because over time you've seen that she's only really played with like Skirk or Neuvillette. And he even says that Neuvillette isn't that relevant at the top level. But again, to be harsh, I think that shows a hole because a lot of these other characters' ratings, like maybe Fischl's ratings, Shinobu, Xingqiu, a lot of those characters' ratings were not necessarily looking at the top level. And if you're not looking at the top level, if you're considering more casual players, then it's just the truth that Furina was a very popular option and still is a very popular option in a lot of teams. Characters released before her, characters released after her. And if you do want to be harsh, if you want to only look at the tryhards, then yeah, it is true that she probably is overrated in a lot of use cases. But I think she has to be up here in an all-time top supports list. If you want to be harsh, I guess one of the reasons I'm knocking her down is because she came out, she came out in Font 10, if you want to be harsh, whereas some of these other characters have existed since 1.0. But I'm not dropping her because of strength. Although, I mean, I have always said some of her use was because people did pull constellations and because people like Furina. That is true, but I think she's still very good. Third, Zajef put Xingqiu, and we've already covered him. But who we haven't covered is Xiangling, and understandably, some people would say it's hard to even consider Xiangling just because she's doing damage. But the way I look at it, Xiangling was a character released in 1.0, and basically until a few patches into Natlin, she was a core character that so many teams played her to fill out the team for your DPS. You have your DPS, then who are the characters that you're supporting them with? And Xiangling comes up a lot. And even though she does damage, she does have supportive stuff. Like she has her C1, her C6, even just the idea of applying Pyro. I would consider applying Pyro a supporting thing. And like I said, if you want to consider Shinobu, Fischl to have some supportive stuff, then it does sound weird to say Xiangling's a support, but I think you could. I mean, again, if you want to go through the start of the game, people were playing Xiangling with Venti, with Klee, with Child, Ganyu. She was even in Xiao's optimal team, even though a lot of people just like playing him with double Geo and stuff like that. Raiden, one of the most popular teams ever, Raiden National. Speaking of that, Zajef did say when he was rating Xingqiu that he said Xingqiu was national. I have to say, I feel like most people would say Xiangling is national, or at least Xiangling Bennett is national. People were even playing her with Ayato, with Yelan. Again, not that much in Sumeru, although people were playing her with Wanderer. Then you were playing her with Dia, with Linny, Vape Neuvillette, Risley, Furina, Navia. Again, like Navia, Xiangling's doing damage with Navia, but she's also applying Pyro for her crystallized shards. Specifically in Fontaine, to be honest, like Linny, Xiangling was kind of a support for his passive and applying Pyro. Vape for Neuvillette, Melt for Risley, Vape for Furina, applying Pyro for Navia's crystallized. Filling out a Hydro slot for Chlorand, but activating Burning teams here, activating Vape teams. A Pyro option for Chaska. It was only really around here where Xiangling stopped being played much and started being more niche. But I have to say something about Xiangling falling off around here. A lot of people would say she fell off because the game released Pyro, MC, and Moika. I think that's only 50% of the case. I think 50% of it is just that after they released Moika, they started releasing a lot of battle ships. And a lot of these ships, you can't even play Xiangling or Moika, really. Even when we get into Durin, is Durin really played in Hexarai teams because he applies Pyro off field or sub DPS? I think he's basically the battleship for Hexarai teams, to be honest. I think Xiangling would have had less use even if Moika and Pyro MC didn't exist. They did impact her, but I think a lot of this is they're just releasing all these niche teams. And once you consider that a lot of that niche stuff happened more recently, which is kind of after the cutoff for this, and you look at all time and the all time use for Xiangling, even though I know a lot of people hated playing her and batterying her, you have to respect the impact that she had in the game from launch. I mean, would anyone disagree? I feel like the only reason why you put Xiangling lower is, again, I think it's the bias of the modern game. I think that goes for sub DPSs in general. If you want to talk about Xiangling's damage, as the characters get more and more stronger, especially as they get more and more hypercarry focused, that just diminishes the value of sub DPS in general in favor of supports that buff them. And even if you're looking at characters who are supposed to be sub DPSs, like an Escoffier, for example, or Colombina, like even these characters who are designed to be modern sub DPSs in specific teams, optimally, you might not even be playing her with Golden Troop. You can play it with a buffing set. And even Colombina, you might be using Prototype Amber and SMS instead of her signature sub DPS set. Oh yeah, so we already talked about it. Zajef had Furina as number 2. I think my number 2 is obvious at this point. It would be Kazuha. I think I already spoke about it. Just the sheer amount of teams and use cases that Kazuha had all the way until Natlin, which is pretty much the entirety of the time frame of this list. He's pretty much only second to Bennett, maybe, in terms of just how many teams Kazuha was the premier option. And unlike some of these other characters like Xingqiu and Yelan, a lot of those there wasn't even much alternative. Like maybe some people were using Zhongli for comfort, or maybe some teams were using Sucrose, but a lot of those teams throughout Inazuma Fontaine, you wasn't really using Sucrose. And Zhongli was the comfort option, but he was clearly inferior damage-wise to Kazuha. Let alone the fact that we look at AoE content, there was a lot more AoE in the Abyss as well. So it wasn't even damage-wise, Kazuha was insane, but it was also his grouping that was insane. I feel like he definitely doesn't have many uses now, absolutely. But I feel like it's too easy to forget about just how many teams Kazuha was him for. Even when it comes to comparing him versus other characters, it's too easy to forget what the game was like before. I feel like just the saying, like people used to say Bennett Kazuha this, Bennett Kazuha that. I feel like even that shouldn't make it too controversial to have him at number 2 of all time. And then number 1, I don't think there's any disagreements. I don't think there's too many people who can even disagree with Bennett. Do we even need to say why Bennett is number 1? I was actually watching a Mr. Pokey video, and he was wondering why Bennett is seen as so good, even though all he does is provides 1000 attack. For anyone new to the game, what you have to realize is, for like several years of the game, most supports were barely doing anything. Like, maybe this is a bad example, but they released Toma, who was supposed to be, I guess, a signature support for Hu Tao. And the only buff this guy has in his kit is 15% to your normals and charges at C6. Honestly, one of the better buffers at launch Mona has a damage bonus, but she could also equip TTDS. In fact, that's why stuff like TTDS was so good. It's because 48% from TTDS and 20 attack from Noblesse. That is more buffs than you'd get in actual characters' kits. So Bennett being a character who also had Noblesse, if you did theory crafting back then, in the first few years of the game, you would see, aside from someone like Kazuha, Bennett was probably giving you like double the amount of buffs as other supports would give. It was just completely unbalanced. On top of being the best healer, or at least one of the best healers, very fast healing, very high. On top of activating Pyro Res for even more attack. On top of synergizing really well with basically every character, especially characters that snapshotted. And also, a lot of DPSs released for the first few years were all attack scalers as well. My final thoughts is, I do agree with what Zajef said towards the end of his video, where he said basically no character should replace Bennett even 5 years later. But I think that honestly extends to most of this. I think that with the way power creep has gotten in the game, I don't think many of these supports will even be replaced even 5 years from now, because the way supports are released now is they're released in combos. You'll be lucky if a support gets 2 uses before there's another team. People are talking about Escoffier. Like, Escoffier at the moment, she's only really had Skirk teams as her new teams. But honestly, there could be a chance that the next character might not even use freeze. The next cryo DPS might be a shatter DPS or a superconduct. So maybe some supports in the future could creep up in here, but I don't think things will change that much, which is probably not a good thing, but that's just the way the power creep has gone these days. Okay, how would you guys rate this list out of 10? Compare them. This is Zajef's list. This is mine. Obviously, don't take it too serious because we had different reasoning and different methodology in some areas. Although I did try to keep alongside his rules as best as I could. But I also have different tastes as well. Or maybe you think we both suck. So there's that as well. Yeah, maybe we'll upload this to YouTube and see what happens. Let's see if the YouTube comments flame me.